また1週間が過ぎた。
星たちの住む場所はどんな感じなのかな。
In a time-lapse video, it looks like a monster coming alive. For a moment, it sits there innocuously. Then, ripples move across its surface. It bulges outwards, bursting with weird boils. It triples in volume. Its color darkens ominously, and its surface hardens into an alien topography of peaks and craters. Then the kitchen timer dings. Your cookie is ready. What happened inside that oven? Don't let the apron deceive you. Bakers are mad scientists. When you slide the pan into the oven, you're setting off a series of chemical reactions that transform one substance, dough, into another, cookies. When the dough reaches 92 degrees Fahrenheit, the butter inside melts, causing the dough to start spreading out. Butter is an emulsion, or mixture of two substances that don't want to stay together. In this case, water and fat, along with some dairy solids that help hold them together. As the butter melts, its trapped water is released, and as the cookie gets hotter, the water expands into steam. It pushes against the dough from the inside, trying to escape through the cookie walls, like Ridley Scott's chest-bursting alien. Your eggs may have been home to squirming salmonella bacteria. An estimated 142,000 Americans are infected this way each year. Though salmonella can live for weeks outside a living body, and even survive freezing, 136 degrees is too hot for them. When your dough reaches that temperature, they die off. You'll live to test your fate with the bite of raw dough you sneak from your next batch. At 144 degrees, changes begin in the proteins, which come mostly from the eggs in your dough. Eggs are composed of dozens of different kinds of proteins, each sensitive to a different temperature. In an egg fresh from the hen, these proteins look like coiled up balls of string. When they're exposed to heat energy, the protein strings unfold and get tangled up in linters. This linked structure makes the runny egg nearly solid, giving substance to squishy dough. Water boils away at 212 degrees, so like mud baking in the sun, your cookie gets dried out and it stiffens. Cracks spread across its surface. The steam that was bubbling inside evaporates, leaving behind airy pockets that make the cookie flaky. Helping this along is your leaven agent, sodium bicarbonate, or baking soda. The sodium bicarbonate reacts with acids in the dough to create carbon dioxide gas, which makes airy pockets in the dough. Now it's nearly ready for a refreshing dunk in a cool glass of milk. One of science's tastiest reactions occurs at 310 degrees. This is the temperature for Maillard reactions. Maillard reactions result when proteins and sugars break down and rearrange themselves, forming ring-like structures, which reflect light in a way that gives foods like Thanksgiving turkey and hamburgers their distinctive, rich brown color. As this reaction occurs, it produces a range of flavor and aroma compounds, which also react with each other, forming even more complex tastes and smells. Caramelization is the last reaction to take place inside your cookie. Caramelization is what happens when sugar molecules break down under high heat, forming the sweet, nutty, and slightly bitter flavor compounds that define, well, caramel. And in fact, if your recipe calls for a 350-degree oven, it'll never happen, since caramelization starts at 356 degrees. If your ideal cookie is barely browned, like a Northeasterner on a beach vacation, you could have set your oven to 310 degrees. If you like your cookies to have a nice tan, crank up the heat. Caramelization continues up to 390 degrees. And here's another trick. You don't need that kitchen timer.
What the
Your
heck?
nose is a sensitive scientific instrument. When you smell the nutty, toasty aromas of the Maillard reaction and caramelization, your cookies are ready. Grab your glass of milk, put your feet up, and reflect that science can be pretty sweet.
私に服従しなさい。千鳥バットン。
震えなさい。
時期を見て動きましょう。
currently accounts for more than 1/10 of our global crop production. The United States alone has enough cornfields to cover Germany. But while other crops we grow come in a range of varieties, over 99% of cultivated corn is the exact same type, yellow dent number 2. This means that humans grow more yellow dent number 2 than any other plant on the planet. So how did this single variety of this single plant become the biggest success story in agricultural history? Nearly 9,000 years ago, corn, also called maize, was first domesticated from teosinte, a grass native to Mesoamerica. Teosinte's rock-hard seeds were barely edible, but its fibrous husk could be turned into a versatile material. Over the next 4,700 years, farmers bred the plant into a staple crop with larger cobs and edible kernels. As maize spread throughout the Americas, it took on an important role, with multiple indigenous societies revering a corn mother as the goddess who created agriculture. When Europeans first arrived in America, they shunned the strange plant. Many even believed it was the source of physical and cultural differences between them and the Mesoamericans. However, their attempts to cultivate European crops in American soil quickly failed, and the settlers were forced to expand their diet. Finding a crop to their taste, maize soon crossed the Atlantic, where its ability to grow in diverse climates made it a popular grain in many European countries.
So tanky.
But the newly established United States was still the corn capital of the world. In the early 1800s, different regions across the country produced strains of varying size and taste. In the 1850s, however, these unique varieties proved difficult for train operators to package and for traders to sell. Trade boards in rail hubs like Chicago encouraged corn farmers to breed one standardized crop. This dream would finally be realized at 1893's World's Fair, where James Reed's yellow dent corn won the blue ribbon. Over the next 50 years, yellow dent corn swept the nation. Following the technological developments of World War II, mechanized harvesters became widely available. This meant a batch of corn that previously took a full day to harvest by hand could now be collected in just 5 minutes. Another wartime technology, the chemical explosive ammonium nitrate, also found new life on the farm. With this new synthetic fertilizer, farmers could plant dense fields of corn year after year without the need to rotate their crops and restore nitrogen to the soil. While these advances made corn an attractive crop to American farmers, U.S. agricultural policy limited the amount farmers could grow to ensure high sale prices. But in 1972, President Richard Nixon removed these limitations while negotiating massive grain sales to the Soviet Union. With this new trade deal and World War II technology, corn production exploded into a global phenomenon. These mountains of maize inspired numerous corn concoctions. Corn starch could be used as a thickening agent for everything from gasoline to glue, or processed into a low-cost sweetener known as high fructose corn syrup. Maize quickly became one of the cheapest animal feeds worldwide. This allowed for inexpensive meat production, which in turn increased the demand for meat. Today, humans eat only 40% of all cultivated corn, while the remaining 60% supports consumer good industries worldwide. Yet the spread of this wonder crop has come at a price. Global water sources are polluted by excess ammonium nitrate from corn plants. Corn accounts for a large portion of agriculture-related carbon emissions, partly due to the increased meat production it enables. The use of high fructose corn syrup may be a contributor to diabetes and obesity. And the rise of monoculture farming has left our food supply dangerously vulnerable to pests and pathogens. A single virus could infect the world's supply of this ubiquitous crop. Corn has gone from a bush of grass to an essential element of the world's industries. But only time will tell if it has led us into the limits of unsustainability. Did you know cheese is one of humanity's oldest foods? You gotta be kidding me. No wonder it's so smelly. This lesson on the history of cheese will blow your mind. Watch it to end this onslaught of terrible puns.
行動開始行きましょう雷鳴
The annals of ancient Egyptian king Thutmose III described a marvelous foreign bird that gives birth daily. Zoroastrians viewed them as spirits whose cries told of the cosmic struggle between darkness and light. Romans brought them on their military campaigns to foretell the success of future battles. And today, this bird still occupies an important, though much less honorable position. The modern chicken is descended primarily from the red fowl and partially from 3 other closely related species, all native to India and Southeast Asia. The region's bamboo plants produce massive amounts of fruit just once every few decades. Jumbo fowls' ability to lay eggs daily may have evolved to take advantage of these rare feasts, increasing their population when food was abundant. This was something humans could exploit on a consistent basis, and the bird's weak flight capabilities and limited need for space made them easy to capture and contain. The earliest domesticated chickens, dating at least back to 7,000 years ago, weren't bred for food, but for something considered less savory today. The aggressiveness of evolution males armed with natural leg spurs made cockfighting a popular entertainment. By the 2nd millennium BCE, chickens had spread from the Indus Valley to China and the Middle East to occupy royal menageries and to be used in religious rituals. But it was in Egypt where the next chapter in the bird's history began. When a hen naturally incubates eggs, she will stop laying new ones and sit on a clutch of 6 or more eggs for 21 days. By the middle of the 1st millennium BCE, the Egyptians had learned to artificially incubate chicken eggs by placing them in baskets over hot ashes. That freed up hens to continue laying daily, and what had been a royal delicacy or religious offering became a common meal. Around the same time as Egyptians were incubating eggs, Phoenician merchants introduced chickens to Europe, where they quickly became an essential part of European livestock. However, for a long time, the chicken's revered status continued to exist alongside its culinary one. The ancient Greeks used fighting roosters as inspirational examples for young soldiers. The Romans consulted chickens as oracles, and as late as the 7th century, the chicken was considered a symbol for Christianity. Over the next few centuries, chickens accompanied humans wherever they went, spreading throughout the world through trade, conquest, and colonization. After the Opium Wars, Chinese breeds were brought to England and crossed with local chickens. This gave rise to a phenomenon called or the fancy, with farmers all over Europe striving to breed new varieties with particular combinations of traits. This trend also caught the attention of a certain Charles Darwin, who wondered if a similar selective breeding process occurred in nature. Darwin would observe hundreds of chickens while finalizing his historic work, introducing the theory of evolution. But the chicken's greatest contribution to science was yet to come. In the early 20th century, a trio of British scientists conducted extensive crossbreeding of chickens, building on Gregor Mendel's studies of genetic inheritance. With their high genetic diversity, many distinct traits, and only 7 months between generations, chickens were the perfect subject. This work resulted in the famous Punnett square, used to show the genotypes that would result from breeding a given pairing. Since then, numerous breeding initiatives have made chickens bigger and meatier and allowed them to lay more eggs than ever. Meanwhile, chicken production has shifted to an industrial factory-like model, with birds raised in spaces with a footprint no larger than a sheet of paper. And while there's been a shift towards free-range farming due to animal rights and environmental concerns, most of the world's more than 22 billion chickens today are factory farmed. From gladiators and gifts to the gods, to traveling companions and research subjects, chickens have played many roles over the centuries. And though they may not have come before the proverbial egg, chickens' fascinating history tells us a great deal about our own. So what about the chickens? What do they think of all this? Since we can't say for sure, why not take a moment to learn more about how animals communicate and how they experience pain?
Kit nhà em, hoặc em ở TK. Nick nhà em.
Our home is burning. Rapid climate change is destabilizing our world. It seems our emissions will not fall quickly enough to avoid runaway warming, and we may soon hit tipping points that will lead to the collapse of ecosystems and our civilization. While scientists, activists, and much of the younger generation urge action, it appears most politicians are not committed to doing anything meaningful, while the fossil fuel industry still works actively against change. It seems humanity can't overcome its greed and obsession with short-term profit and personal gain to save itself. And so for many, the future looks grim and hopeless. Young people feel particularly anxious and depressed. Instead of looking ahead to a lifetime of opportunity, they wonder if they will even have a future, or if they should bring kids into this world. It's an age of doom and hopelessness, and giving up seems the only sensible thing to do. But that's not true. You are not doomed. Humanity is not doomed. Despite the seriousness of the situation, for years positive trends have accumulated, and there is finally some good news and a clear path towards our collective climate goals. Welcome to our TED Talk.
So wrong.
Please watch this video to the end. Check out our detailed sources afterwards to learn more. Okay, let's start with the scariest things. Cancelling the apocalypse. Some of the most widely shared stories about climate change are that it is an existential threat, the end of human civilization, and maybe even our own
Where's that
extinction
China?
event, and that it's basically unavoidable now. But what does science actually say? As of 2022, the global average temperature has risen 1.2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial times. Limiting warming to 1.5 degrees was the most ambitious goal of the Paris Agreement, but we are not likely to meet it. Already with the warming we have today, hot places will get hotter, wet places wetter, and the risk and strength of extreme weather events increase significantly. Warming beyond 2 degrees makes all of these extremes more extreme. Extreme weather events more common, with more ecosystems under major pressure.
Wait.
Some will not survive. At 3 degrees, significant parts of Earth, especially in developing countries, might become unable to feed their populations. Heat waves will become a major global issue. Large-scale natural systems will break down. The scale and frequency of hurricanes, fires, and droughts will further increase and cause trillions in damage. Poor regions and subsistence farmers will be hit the hardest. Hundreds of millions of people will need to leave their homes. In the 4 to 8 degree range, the apocalypse begins. The hothouse Earth, where things change so quickly that it may become unable to support our large human population, and billions may perish, leaving the rest on a hostile alien planet. A decade ago, for lack of action and perspective, many scientists assumed a 4+ degree world was our future, and a lot of public communication focused on exactly this future path. Luckily, it's much less likely that this version of the apocalypse will come to pass. If current climate policies stagnate, we're likely to end up with warming of around 3 degrees Celsius by 2100, which is scary and tragic and far from acceptable. But this is actually good news. How? In the last decade, we've seen enough progress that most scientists now think that we have likely avoided apocalyptic climate change. Although substantial risk still remains, we can pretty confidently say that humanity isn't going anywhere. Civilization might have to change, but it will endure. Which begs the question, what has changed over the last 10 years? And is this really good news? The invisible shift. You probably know this story. The last decade has been an immense failure for climate policies around the world. Instead of passing comprehensive, binding bills that would meaningfully reduce emissions, we mostly did nothing. A lost decade with one negative record after another. And this story is true, and it's one reason why so many people are giving up. But it is not the whole picture. Despite the lack of climate policies and ongoing lobbying and misinformation campaigns from the fossil fuel industries, there was a lot of progress. Let's go back 20 years to see why today is so different. Between 2000 and 2010, greenhouse gas emissions had grown by 24%, 3 times as much as the increase in the previous decade. Subsidies for fossil fuels aimed at promoting economic growth caused a colossal increase in their consumption. For developing countries like China and India, coal was the cheapest fuel for growth, while rich countries showed little interest in changing their ways. In 2010, many people expected these trends to continue. Instead of decreasing fossil fuel use, its consumption would rise. The next decade turned out to be very different, though. First of all, coal burning in developing countries like India has slowed down or leveled off, like in China, and it's plummeted in rich countries like the UK and US. Since 2015, 3/4 of planned coal plants have been cancelled, and 44 countries have committed to stop building them. 10 years ago, that would have seemed like wishful thinking, but today we can say with confidence, coal is dying. It's just not competitive anymore. Because technologies we thought would remain expensive matured rapidly instead. Renewable electricity has shown explosive progress. In a mere decade, wind energy got 3 times cheaper. Solar electricity is now 10 times cheaper. Cheaper than coal or any other fossil fuel burning power plant, despite the massive subsidies and global infrastructure propping up fossil fuels. 25 times more solar and nearly 5 times more wind electricity is produced today compared with 10 years ago, which is of course not nearly enough. One of the biggest obstacles is the variability of their power output. Renewables need a lot of energy storage to be a reliable power source, like expensive batteries. Amazingly, battery prices have decreased by 97% in the past 30 years, 60% in the last decade alone, which will serve all kinds of green technology like electric cars. You might say, well, that's great, but didn't Kotzgesart's last climate video say that while wind and solar are nice, we need nothing less than a fundamental transition of our global industrial system? Yes, but luckily the shift goes beyond just the energy sector. Throughout the economy, people are working on improving current technology to lower emissions. We're rapidly replacing old incandescent light bulbs with LEDs that are 10 times more efficient. In 2020, about 7 out of 10 new cars in Norway were electric or hybrid. In 2021, it was already 8 out of 10.
Too early.
And the list goes on, from electric heating and better insulation to ships traveling at half speed to save fuel. Wherever you look, you find scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs trying to solve some aspect of climate change. Enormous amounts of human ingenuity are being brought to bear on this problem, with more and more people deciding to prioritize preventing rapid climate change. Solutions for low-carbon production of cement, electronics and steel, and innovations like artificial meat and carbon capture are in the works. The more of these technologies we deploy, the cheaper new and better technology gets. The cheaper they get, the more people use them, and so on. We can see the impact already. The domestic CO2 output of rich countries is falling without a major recession. Since the year 2000, the EU as a whole shows a 21% decrease, Italy 28%, the UK 35%, Denmark 43%. But the best news may be that emissions are no longer necessarily coupled with economic growth. In the past, this was an inconvenient truth. To get richer, you had to emit more, which led to fierce arguments between developing and developed countries about the fairness of reducing emissions while their populations were still poor. But in the last decade, we've seen that it is possible to increase prosperity without increasing emissions. Emissions in the Czech Republic dropped 13%, while their GDP grew by 27%. France reduced their CO2 emissions by 14%, while increasing GDP by 15%. Romania saw an 8% decrease and 35% growth. And even the largest economy on Earth, the USA, decreased emissions by 4% while growing their GDP by 26%. Some of you may call this a numbers trick, that rich countries are just exporting emissions to poorer nations by moving the dirty parts of their economies like manufacturing. But even when we account for all of our imported goods, the numbers still look positive. It's no longer a matter of having to choose between prosperity and the climate, as it seemed to be a decade ago. Developing countries will profit from that because as rich countries pay for the expensive development of green technologies, they can adopt them more cheaply.
Đủ má, quy
They
tê đâu.
can skip most of the high emission phase that today's rich countries went through.
Sus.
We are at the point where not decarbonizing is a bad business decision. And we haven't even really talked about solutions like carbon capture. In 2000, it didn't really exist. In 2022, that technology does exist. It costs around $600 to remove 1 ton of CO2 from the atmosphere. As investment pours in and the technology matures and begins to scale, it's likely that these costs will plummet over the next few decades. So everything's fine then? Well, let's not get carried away. All of these processes are great, but not really fast enough. We're still doing way too little, and technology will not magically solve everything. We need to use fewer resources and use them longer,
That's weird,
design
man.
consumer goods that are repairable and
HT
durable,
supposed to
and
QTE,
decrease our
so-
energy requirements. We need much better infrastructure, agriculture, and
Oh.
cities.
No
It will
more
still be hard
paralyzed
work,
QTE.
especially to get the right policies
That sucks.
passed and enacted. But for the first time ever, there are a few trend lines
So there's
pointing
no
solidly in
paralyzed-
the right direction.
Oh,
And
I
now
thought they
imagine
added
if all of
paralyzed.
this was achieved
Scam, man.
without proper financial
Scam.
and political support, and despite fossil fuel lobbying, just think what humanity can do when climate change finally gets the political attention and funding it needs. So is it okay to feel hopeful again? The situation is still dire and serious, so what's the point of focusing on this side of the story? The trap of hopelessness. Climate change can feel overwhelming and make your future seem bleak. The sadness and hopelessness
Yeah,
that
but-
many people feel is real and very destructive because it causes apathy. Apathy that is only serving the fossil fuel industry that is still delaying change however it can. In a sense, they have weaponized hopelessness. We are now in phase 4 in the public debate about rapid climate change action. Phase 1 was, climate change is not real. Phase 2 was, climate change is real, but not caused by humans. Phase 3 was, climate change may be caused by humans, but it's not that bad. Phase 4 is, climate change is no longer avoidable. We are doomed, and it doesn't matter what we do. If we want the world to change, we first need to believe that change is possible, and we have an abundance of evidence that it is. Changes to our industrial system are gaining momentum. Technology gets better and cheaper. Climate change has become a key issue in most free elections. As more and more younger people move into influential positions, they prioritize climate change and work on new solutions. In 2022, most governments not only acknowledge it, but set their own net zero goals in democratic and autocratic countries. The results of years of fighting a steep uphill battle are now clearly visible. The pressure needs to keep increasing to make sure that the promises made today are actually kept. Climate doomerism is the equivalent of giving up, even though you can still prevent not just the worst case, but also mitigate most of the bad things, make changes in time to adapt better, and prevent the poorest from suffering. That is why hopelessness and apathy are so
Scam.
dangerous. If
the
the
fuck,
last,
scam?
in many ways, wasted decade has shown anything, then it's that progress is being made, and that dire scenarios are just predictions, not our sealed fate. As of 2022, based on current global policies, we will end up in a 3 degrees world. Now it's our job to yet again prove the predictions wrong, despite how serious and urgent things are. To turn that 3 degrees into a 2 degrees and then see where we can go from there. For that, we need hope. And we hope we gave you that today, at least a little. That you feel that things are serious, but also that you have a future. That you can have kids without dooming them or the world. That taking action today is worth it. And that despite powerful industries doing everything to delay it, society is changing. If you need a more concrete roadmap of what you can do personally, we're working on a follow-up video to talk about that in greater detail. Doomerism, inactivity, and weaponized hopelessness are the only trump cards left for the powers that don't want change. Don't let them win. We're still excited about the future, and we think one of the best things you can do to keep your optimism and curiosity up is to learn new things. If you don't know where to start, our friends from Brilliant.org have got you covered. Brilliant makes maths
so
and science
wrong.
accessible and fun with a hands-on approach. More than 60 interactive courses like The Joy of Problem Solving or Scientific Thinking give you the tools to crack problems in maths, science and computer science that are all designed to get your intuition going and give you plenty of aha experiences. Lessons will surprise you with storytelling, code writing tasks and interactive challenges, basically using whatever keeps you interested and entertained. All the content is interactive. Instead of just reading and listening to explanations, you drag and drop, manipulate shapes and diagrams, make selections and answer questions. This way you learn something almost without you noticing it. And tiny step by step, you'll build up your long-term understanding of science and get closer to your STEM goals. To start looking at the world of science from a different perspective, go to brilliant.org/nutshell and sign up for free. And there's an extra perk for Kurzgesagt viewers. The first 200 people to use the link get 20% off their annual membership, which unlocks all of Brilliant's courses in maths, science and computer science. At Kurzgesagt, we love to create things that seem impossible at first. Brilliant can help you acquire the skills to do that. Everybody feels lonely from time to time. When we have no one to sit next to at lunch, when we move to a new city, or when nobody has time for us at the weekend. But over the last few decades, this occasional feeling has become chronic for millions. In the UK, 60% of 18 to 34-year-olds say they often feel lonely. In the US, 46% of the entire population feel lonely regularly. We are living in the most connected time in human history, and yet an unprecedented number of us feel isolated. Being lonely and being alone are not the same thing. You can be filled with bliss by yourself and hate every second surrounded by friends. Loneliness is a purely subjective, individual experience. If you feel lonely, you are lonely. A common stereotype is that loneliness only happens to people who don't know how to talk to people or how to behave around others. But population-based studies have shown that social skills make practically no difference for adults when it comes to social connections. Loneliness can affect everybody. Money, fame, power, beauty, social skills, a great personality. Nothing can protect you against loneliness because it's part of your biology.
So?
Loneliness is a bodily function, like hunger. Hunger makes you pay attention to your physical needs. Loneliness makes you pay attention to your social needs. Your body cares about your social needs because millions of years ago it was a great indicator of how likely you were to survive. Natural selection rewarded our ancestors for collaboration and for forming connections with each other. Our brains grew and became more and more fine-tuned to recognize what others thought and felt and to form and sustain social bonds. Being social became part of our biology. You were born into groups of 50 to 150 people, which you usually stayed with for the rest of your life. Getting enough calories, staying safe and warm, or caring for offspring was practically impossible alone. Being together meant survival. Being alone meant death. So it was crucial that you got along with others. For your ancestors, the most dangerous threat to survival was not being eaten by a lion, but not getting the social vibe of your group and being excluded. To avoid that, your body came up with social pain. Pain of this kind is an evolutionary adaptation to rejection. A sort of early warning system to make sure you stop behavior that would isolate you. Your ancestors who experienced rejection as more painful were more likely to change their behavior when they got rejected and thus stayed in the tribe, while those who did not got kicked out and most likely died. That's why rejections hurt, and even more so, why loneliness is so painful. These mechanisms for keeping us connected worked great for most of our history until humans began building a new world for themselves. The loneliness epidemic we see today really only started in the late Renaissance. Western culture began to focus on the individual. Intellectuals moved away from the collectivism of the Middle Ages, while the young Protestant theology stressed individual responsibility. This trend accelerated during the Industrial Revolution. People left their villages and fields to enter factories. Communities that had existed for hundreds of years began to dissolve, while cities grew. As our world rapidly became modern, this trend sped up more and more. Today, we move vast distances for new jobs, love and education, and leave our social net behind. We meet fewer people in person, and we meet them less often than in the past. In the US, the mean number of close friends dropped from 3 in 1985 to 2 in 2011.
Căng đấy.
Most people stumble into chronic loneliness by accident. You reach adulthood and become busy with work, university, romance, kids and Netflix. There's just not enough time. The most convenient and easy thing to sacrifice is time with friends. Till you wake up one day and realize that you feel isolated, that you yearn for close relationships. But it's hard to find close connections as adults, and so loneliness can become chronic. While humans feel pretty great about things like iPhones and spaceships, our bodies and minds are fundamentally the same they were 50,000 years ago. We are still biologically fine-tuned to being with each other. Large-scale studies have shown that the stress that comes from chronic loneliness is among the most unhealthy things we can experience as humans. It makes you age quicker, it makes cancer deadlier, Alzheimer's advance faster, your immune system's weaker. Loneliness is twice as deadly as obesity and as deadly as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. The most dangerous thing about it is that once it becomes chronic, it can become self-sustaining. Physical and social pain use common mechanisms in your brain. Both feel like a threat, and so social pain leads to immediate and defensive behavior when it's inflicted on you. When loneliness becomes chronic, your brain goes into self-preservation mode. It starts to see danger and hostility everywhere. But that's not all. Some studies found that when you're lonely, your brain is much more receptive and alert to social signals, while at the same time, it gets worse at interpreting them correctly. You pay more attention to others, but you understand them less. The part of your brain that recognizes faces gets out of tune and becomes more likely to categorize neutral faces as hostile, which makes it distrustful of others. Loneliness makes you assume the worst about others' intentions towards you. Because of this perceived hostile world, you can become more self-centered to protect yourself, which can make you appear more cold, unfriendly and socially awkward than you really are. If loneliness has become a strong presence in your life, the first thing you can do is to try to recognize the vicious cycle you may be trapped in. It usually goes something like this. An initial feeling of isolation leads to feelings of tension and sadness, which makes you focus your attention selectively on negative interactions with others. This makes your thoughts about yourself and others more negative, which then changes your behavior. You begin to avoid social interaction, which leads to more feelings of isolation. This cycle becomes more severe and harder to escape each time. Loneliness makes you sit far away from others in class, not answer the phone when friends call, decline invitations until the invitations stop. Each and every one of us has a story about ourselves, and if your story becomes that people exclude you, others pick up on that. And so the outside world can become the way you feel about it. This is often a slow creeping process that takes years and can end in depression and a mental state that prevents connections even if you yearn for them. The first thing you can do to escape it is to accept that loneliness is a totally normal feeling and nothing to be ashamed of. Literally everybody feels lonely at some point in their life. It's a universal human experience. You can't eliminate or ignore a feeling until it goes away magically, but you can accept that you feel it and get rid of its cause. You can self-examine what you focus your attention on and check if you are selectively concentrating on negative things. Was this interaction with a colleague really negative? Or was it really neutral or even positive? What was the actual content of an interaction? What did the other person say? And did they say something bad, or did you add extra meaning to their words? Maybe another person was not really reacting negatively, but just short on time. Then there are your thoughts about the world. Are you assuming the worst about others' intentions? Do you enter a social situation and have already decided how it will go? Do you assume others don't want you around? Are you trying to avoid being hurt and not risking opening up? And if so, can you try to give others the benefit of the doubt? Can you just assume that they're not against you? Can you risk being open and vulnerable again? And lastly, your behavior. Are you avoiding opportunities to be around others? Are you looking for excuses to decline invitations? Or are you pushing others away preemptively to protect yourself? Are you acting as if you're getting attacked? Are you really looking for new connections, or have you become complacent with your situation? Of course, every person and situation is unique and different, and just introspection alone might not be enough. If you feel unable to solve your situation by yourself, please try to reach out and get professional help. It's not a sign of weakness, but of courage. However we look at loneliness as a purely individual problem that needs solving to create more personal happiness, or as a public health crisis, it is something that deserves more attention. Humans have built a world that's nothing short of amazing, and yet none of the shiny things we've made is able to satisfy or substitute our fundamental biological need for connection. Most animals get what they need from their physical surroundings. We get what we need from each other. And we need to build our artificial human world based on that. Let's try something together. Let's reach out to someone today. Regardless if you feel a little bit lonely, or if you want to make someone else's day better. Maybe write a friend you haven't spoken to in a while. Call a family member who's become estranged. Invite a work buddy for a coffee. Or just go to something you're usually too afraid to go to or too lazy to go to, like a D&D event or a sports club. Everybody's different, so you know what's a good fit for you. Maybe nothing will come of it, and that's okay. Don't do this with any expectations. The goal is just to acknowledge it, to exercise your connection muscles so they can grow stronger over time, or to help others exercise them. We want to recommend two of the books we read while researching this video. Emotional First Aid by NGUYEN, a book that addresses, among other topics, how to deal with loneliness in a way that we found helpful and actionable. And Loneliness, Human Nature and the Need for Social Connection by John Kachiopo and William Patrick. It's an entertaining and scientific exploration as to why we experience loneliness on a biological level, how it's spread in society, and what science has to say about how to escape it. Links for both books in the video description.
US Beta. Sai thế nào ta? Su rong. What?
When I was 9 years old, I went off to summer camp for the first time, and my mother packed me a suitcase full of books.
For the microscopic lab work, C. elegans, life equates to just a few short weeks. Compare that with the tortoise, which can age to more than 100 years. Mice and rats reach the end of their lives after just 4 years, while for the bovine, Earth's longest lived death will come after 200. Like most living things, the vast majority of animals gradually degenerate after reaching sexual maturity, in the process known as aging. But what does it really mean to age? The drivers behind this process are varied and complicated. But aging is ultimately caused by cell death and dysfunction. When we're young, we constantly regenerate cells in order to replace dead and dying ones. But as we age, this process slows down. In addition, older cells don't perform their functions as well as young ones. That makes our bodies go into a decline, which eventually results in disease and death. But if that's consistently true, why the huge variance in aging patterns and lifespan within the animal kingdom? The answer lies in several factors, including environment and body size. These can place powerful evolutionary pressures on animals to adapt, which in turn makes the aging process different across species.
Đánh kiểu gì khó ta?
Consider the cold depths of the Atlantic and Arctic seas, where Greenland sharks
kiểu
can
nếu gì
live to
ta?
over
Này là
400 years,
ba
and the
ulti
Arctic
liền
clam,
hay
known
gì?
as the quahog, can live up to 500.
Thiếu bạn
Perhaps
nét
the
lên
most
ra.
impressive of these ocean-dwelling ancients is the Antarctic glass sponge, which can survive over 10,000 years in frigid waters. In cold environments like these, heartbeats and metabolic rates slow down. Researchers theorize that this also causes
Nếu
a
hiểu
slowing
sao
of the
phun được
aging
thanh đấy
process.
nếu hiểu.
In this way, the environment shapes longevity. When it comes to size, it's often, but not always, the case that larger species have a longer lifespan than smaller ones. For instance, an elephant or whale will live much longer than a mouse, rat, or vole, which in turn have years on flies and birds. Some small animals, like birds and flies, are also limited by the mechanics of their cell division. They're mostly made up of cells that can't divide and be replaced when damaged, so their bodies expire more quickly. And size is a powerful evolutionary driver in animals. Smaller creatures are more prone to predators. A mouse, for instance, can hardly expect to survive more than a year in the wild. So, it has evolved to grow and reproduce more rapidly,
What the
like
fuck?
an evolutionary defense mechanism against its short lifespan. Larger animals, by contrast, are better at fending off predators, and so they have the luxury of time to grow to large sizes and reproduce multiple times during their lives. Exceptions to the size limit include bats, birds, moles, and turtles, but in each case, these animals have other adaptations that allow them to escape predators. But there are still cases where animals with similar defining features, like size and habitat, age at completely different rates. In these cases, genetic differences like how each organism's cells respond to threats often account for the discrepancies in longevity. So it's the combination of all these factors playing out into different ways in different animals that explains the variability we see in the animal kingdom. So what about us? Humans currently have an average life expectancy of 71 years, meaning that we are close to being the oldest living inhabitants on Earth. But we are very good at increasing our life expectancy. In the early 1900s, humans only lived an average of 50 years. Since then, we've learned to adapt by managing many of the factors of deaths, like environmental exposure and nutrition. This and other increases in life expectancy make us
Which profile?
species on Earth to take the
Which profile picture you mean?
The largest things in the universe are black holes. In contrast to things like planets or stars, they have no physical size limit and can literally grow endlessly. Although in reality, specific things need to happen to create different kinds of black holes, from really tiny
I need
ones
to
to
press
the largest
longer.
single things in the universe. So how do black holes grow? And how large is the largest of them all? This video will not discuss how black holes work or how they form, since we've looked at that in detail in our black hole and neutron star series. You can check them out afterwards. For now, we're interested in finding the largest thing in the universe. Let's start really, really small. Primordial black holes. The smallest kind of black holes may or may not exist. If they do, they're probably the oldest objects in the universe, older even than atoms. They would have formed just after the Big Bang, when the universe was so dense with violent energy that any tiny pocket that was just slightly more dense than its neighbors could produce a black hole. The smallest primordial black hole that would still be around would be 8 trillion kilograms or so, the mass of a big mountain. And yet they would be no bigger than a proton. A primordial black hole with the mass of Earth would barely be larger than a coin. This makes them very hard to find, so we haven't actually observed any yet. If they exist, they may even be the mysterious dark matter that holds galaxies together. Let's move on to the kinds of black holes that we know for sure are out there. Stellar black holes.
We need to press longer.
To make a black hole, we need to compress enough matter so that it collapses into itself. After that, the more mass we throw at it, the larger it becomes. In today's universe, only the most violent cosmic events can create the necessary conditions, such as the merger of neutron stars or when the core of a very massive star collapses in a supernova. To have a unit to work with here, we'll use the mass of our Sun, about 2 million trillion kilograms. The smallest known black hole has 2.7 times the mass of the Sun, which works out as a sphere around 16 kilometers in diameter, large enough to cover Paris. Another lightweight black hole is the companion to the V723 Mon red giant star. This star is 24 times larger than our Sun, 30 million kilometers in diameter. And yet, it's thrown around by a tiny black hole just 17.2 kilometers wide.
What the hell?
This tiny thing bullying the star is so much smaller that we can barely even show them in comparison. One of the largest known stellar black holes is M33X7. It currently spends its time eating a 70 solar mass blue giant bit by bit. As all that stolen matter circles towards the black hole, like water going down a drain, friction heats it up to temperatures high enough to shine 500,000 times brighter than our Sun. And yet, X7 is only 15.65 solar masses and 92 kilometers wide, just big enough to cast a shadow on Corsica. To grow much larger, black holes have to either devour a lot of stars, or better, merge with one another. The instruments that make it possible to detect these mergers are very new, so we're currently discovering a lot of exciting things. Like 2 massive black holes that we detected in a galaxy 17 billion light-years away. As they spun around each other violently, they released more energy in the form of gravitational waves than the combined light from all the stars in the Milky Way in 4,400 years. The new black hole they formed is about the size of Germany and is 142 solar masses. And here we hit a curious gap in scale. There are lots of black holes up to 150 solar masses, and then there's nothing for a long time, until we suddenly hit black holes that are millions of times more massive. Which is a bit confusing because we had this idea that black holes are consistently growing and growing. But for the most massive black holes, this process is not fast enough to explain their existence today. The universe is simply not old enough for these supermassive black holes to have formed by eating stars and merging with each other. Something else must have happened. To explain how we got the largest black holes in the universe, we might need the largest stars that ever existed.
Where's damage?
Quasi-stars. To get a sense of scale, we can compare them to the largest stars that exist today. Our Sun is like a grain of sand next to them. We don't know if quasi-stars actually existed, but they're an interesting concept when it comes to supercharging black hole development. The idea is that the matter in the early universe was so dense that quasi-stars could grow to thousands of times the mass of our Sun. The cores of these stars might have been crushed by their own weight so much to actually collapse into black holes while the star was still forming. In contrast to stars today that would destroy themselves in the process, inside quasi-stars, a deadly balance could emerge. Gravity pressed the supermassive star together, feeding the black hole and heating the material falling in to such a degree that the radiation pressure kept the star stable. And so these quickly growing black holes might have been able to consume the quasi-star for millions of years and grow far bigger
Wow,
than
that-
any modern stellar black hole. Black holes several thousand times the mass of the Sun and wider than the entire Earth. These black holes might have become the seeds for supermassive black holes. So now we arrive at the kings of our universe, the largest single bodies in existence. The centers of most galaxies contain a supermassive black hole, and they are monstrous. In the Milky Way, we have Sagittarius A star, a supermassive black hole with about 4 million solar masses that is calm and collected and just does its thing. We know it sits there because we can see a number of stars being thrown around by a seemingly empty spot. And despite its incredible mass, its radius is still only 17 times our Sun. Smaller than most giant stars, but millions of times more massive. Because supermassive black holes are so massive and located at the center of galaxies, many people imagine them as being a bit like the Sun in the solar system, an anchor that glues everything else together and forces it into an orbit. But this is a misconception. While the Sun makes up 99.86% of all the mass in the solar system, supermassive black holes usually only have 0.001% of the mass of their galaxy. The billions of stars in galaxies are not gravitationally bound to them. Instead, it's the gravitational effect of dark matter which holds them together. Many supermassive black holes aren't gentle giants, especially when they're feeding on the clouds of mass in their galaxy. The one at the center of the BL Lacerti galaxy is devouring so much material that it produces jets of plasma accelerated to nearly the speed of light. If Earth were orbiting this huge body, it would seem 115 times larger than our Sun in the sky, and we'd be burnt to a crisp in seconds by its glowing hot accretion disk. At this point, black holes become so large that stars seem ridiculously
Where's
tiny
SP?
compared to them.
Where's my SP?
The galaxy Cygnus A has a supermassive black hole with 2.5 billion solar masses and 14.7 billion kilometers wide, which would mean that if it took the place of our Sun, it would swallow all the planets and stretch halfway to the edge of our solar system. It's devouring so much mass and material that it churns its disk into a kind of magnetic funnel, spewing gas out, making tremendous radio lobes towering over the galaxy 500,000 light years in diameter. That's 2.5 Milky Ways wide. Another pretty large supermassive black hole sits in the galaxy Messier 87. It has 6.5 billion solar masses and was the first black hole we got an actual photo of, or rather of the glowing gas around the edge of a menacing shadow. This sphere of darkness is so large that it covers our entire solar system. And yet, there is a scale even above these kinds of objects. Ultramassive black holes. Now we reach the most massive black holes, perhaps the largest single bodies that will ever exist. These black holes have eaten so much that they've grown to tens of billions of solar masses, their gravity the engine for a quasar, an accretion disk shining brighter than thousands of galaxies full of stars. So massive that they deserve a title of their own, ultramassive black holes. The ultramassive black hole at the center of galaxy OJ287 is 18 billion solar masses. It's so big that it has a supermassive black hole nearly 40 times larger than Sagittarius A star orbiting it. This thing defies imagination and is really hard to compare to anything. It can comfortably fit 3 solar systems side by side inside of it. Let's end this insane competition and get to the King of Kings. TUN 618, a black hole that we can observe consuming galaxies worth of matter, is shining with the brightness of 100 trillion stars, visible from 18 billion light years away. It has an incredible 66 billion solar masses. A black hole so large that it would take light a week to reach the singularity after crossing the event horizon. About 11 solar systems could sit inside of it, side by side. It may very well be the largest single body in the universe, but in reality, it's probably even larger. Since Ton 618 is so far away, we only see what it looked like 10 billion years ago. In any case, black holes are scary and mysterious and gigantic. They'll be here after everything else dies and growing larger and larger. Now let's do the trip again. From the smallest possible black hole all the way up to the largest.
I'm not fast enough to paralyze it instantly.
Let's try something new today. We can call it Behind the Lines, a short behind-the-scenes bit about the necessary inaccuracies in this video, because it's not really actually possible to rank black holes like trading cards. How so? Well, while we've catalogued millions of stars, we really only have good data on a couple of dozen black holes. That's because black hole gazing wasn't really a thing until 50 years ago, and technically still isn't because we can't see black holes. We can only derive their properties from studying their gravitational effects on the matter around them, like the orbit of stars that come close to them. This effect depends on the mass of the black hole, which we can approximate at the most basic level with Kepler's laws. But this comes with huge uncertainties and error bars. Then we have to convert mass to size next, which brings new uncertainties. For example, we calculated the radius from the mass using the Schwarzschild equation, which for the sake of simplicity assumes black holes are perfectly round and don't spin, a kind of black hole that doesn't really exist. The reality is that physics on these scales is a bit fuzzy. So some of the black holes we talked about here may be way smaller or way bigger. We just don't know for sure. We shimmered around this problem by comparing different sources with different kinds of values and using different mass calculations to arrive at a standardized list that allowed us to be as accurate as humanly possible. You can look at all of this in our source doc. As a result, this script was written with the tears of experts we drove crazy with our obsession for the best values they could live with. In this process, tons of stuff got cut and didn't make it into the final video. But luckily, we found a way to not waste all of it. We've created a lot of black hole merge, spanning the whole range from somewhat bonkers to more serious. This way, we get to explore a topic from different angles, and you get to continue having fun with black holes after this video ends. Is there a
waste
border
damage.
we will never cross? Are there places we will never reach, no matter how hard we try? It turns out there are. Even with sci-fi technology, we are trapped in a limited pocket of the universe and the finite stuff within it. How much universe is there for us, and how
I
far
don't have
can
enough
we
damage.
go? If you look at the night sky, you might assume it will be there forever. Stars born and die again in a cycle that feels endless. But it's not. Take the Milky Way. Up to 200,000 light years in diameter, containing some 100 to 400 billion stars. How many stars do you think are born here each year? Thousands? Millions? The answer is around 3. 3 new stars per year. 95% of all the stars that will ever exist in the universe have already been born, and we live at the tail end of the age of star formation. We are at the beginning of the end of the universe as we know it. The formation of new stars will continue to slow down. But there's more. It turns out that the universe is rushing away from us. The Milky Way is not alone. Together with the Andromeda Galaxy and more than 50 dwarf galaxies, it forms the Local Group, a region of space about 10 million light-years in diameter, our galactic neighborhood. Hundreds of galaxy groups like the Local Group make up the Laniakea supercluster, which itself is only one of a myriad of superclusters. In total, there are around 2 trillion galaxies that make up the current observable universe. Unfortunately, even if we could travel
Sus,
at light
way
speed,
damage.
around 94% of the galaxies we can see are already unreachable for us forever. Let this number sink in for a moment. The simple fact that there's a limit for us and that there is so much universe that a human will never be able to touch is kind of frightening. Why are all of these galaxies out of reach already? Well, it all has to do with why there are galaxies in the first place, the Big Bang. We're simplifying here, but in a nutshell, about 10 to the power of minus 36 seconds after the Big Bang, the young universe was a very small bubble of energy. It wasn't completely uniform, though. Some parts of it were a tiny, tiny bit denser than others, which had massive consequences. In a process called cosmic inflation, the observable universe expanded rapidly, from the size of a marble to trillions of kilometers in a trillionth of a second. That was so fast that all those tiny differences in density were stretched from subatomic distances into galactic distances, which is why the whole universe consists of more and less dense regions. Pockets of the universe filled with a bit more stuff than the space around them. After that short but powerful inflation ended, gravity began trying to pull everything back together. Inside the denser pockets, gravity emerged victorious, and so over time, they grew into groups of galaxies like the one we live in today. The Local Group is our pocket of the universe. But at larger scales, outside the denser pockets, the expansion of space never stopped. This means that our Local Group is surrounded by a lot of stuff, but none of those structures and galaxies are gravitationally bound to us. The more the universe expands, the larger the distance between us and the other gravitational pockets becomes. Even worse for us, the expansion of the universe is accelerating. We don't know why this happens, so we came up with the concept of dark energy. You can imagine it like an invisible effect that speeds up the expansion of the universe. We'll explain these concepts in more detail in another video, though. For now, all you need to know is that the universe is expanding faster and faster. This expansion means that there's a cosmological horizon around us. Everything beyond it is traveling faster relative to us than the speed of light. So everything that passes the horizon is irretrievably out of reach forever, and we will never be able to interact with it again. In a sense, it's like a black hole's event horizon, but all around us. 94% of the galaxies we can see today have already passed it and are lost to us forever. Wait, if we can't interact with them, how come we can still see them? Well, the way we're able to see something is via light. And although the speed of light is the fastest way to travel through the universe, it needs time to get from one place to another. Every second, light reaches us from trillions of galaxies that have passed the horizon because when their light was emitted, they were much closer to us.
How can I
We
not
are looking at their ancient past and see their ancient positions. So the observable universe is much larger than the universe we can actually interact with. In a sense, the universe is pulling off a great show for us, showing us things that are out of reach forever. We have no idea what these galaxies look like today, and we will never know. But we will be able to observe them for a long time as their light hits our telescopes. Interestingly, this means that currently the observable universe still appears to be growing as more and more light released by super distant galaxies billions of years ago is arriving at our doorsteps. Still, all the pockets of the universe outside the Local Group will one day pass our cosmological horizon. Once they do, their light won't be able to reach us anymore, and from our perspective, they will fade away into darkness. Every second of your life, 60,000 stars pass the horizon. Since you started watching this video, around 22 million stars have moved out of our reach forever.
Wait.
Okay, but if 94% of the observable universe is beyond the cosmic horizon and gone
Phải.
forever,
Đủ
that still
mà.
leaves us with 6% that is technically in reach, which is
Kiếm trên
still
đầu. Ủa, sao
a
lại không
ton
đủ
of
kiếm trên đầu?
stuff. All the galaxy pockets that are less than 18 billion light years away. They are still moving away, but slow enough that we could physically reach them, although the chances are shrinking with every second that passes. Everything that's more than around 5 million light years away is moving away from us. But the closest galaxy groups are receding the slowest, so there is a time window to jump galaxy groups. The challenge is extreme though, even for Type 3 civilizations. Even at the speed of light, a trip to the Maphite group, the closest pocket of galaxies outside the local group, would take 11 million years. If some sort of super-motivated, super-advanced civilization takes this challenge on, its potential sphere of influence could expand to hundreds or thousands of galaxies. Although, as time passes and the universe grows, they would be separated forever. It's pretty safe to assume that humans will not make this journey, at least not with technologies that are even remotely on the horizon. For us, the local group is most likely the largest structure that we will ever be a part of. Just traveling between the stars would be an achievement of epic proportions. We would already be incredibly successful if we were to colonize our cosmic backyard, which accounts for 0.00000000001% of the observable universe. As dark energy pushes the rest of the universe away from us, the local group will become more tightly bound. All its galaxies, big and small, will merge together to form one giant elliptical galaxy with the unoriginal name Milkdromeda in a few billion years. This process might even smash huge gas clouds together and re-spark star formation for some time. And this new light will be very welcome because at some point the galaxies outside Milkdromeda will be so far away that they become too faint to detect. Once this happens, no information outside of the local group will reach us ever again. The universe will recede from view. A being born in the far future in Milkdromeda will think that the universe consists of nothing but its own galaxy. When they look far into empty space, they will only see more emptiness and darkness. They won't see cosmic background radiation, and they won't be able to learn about the Big Bang. They may have no way of knowing what we know today, the nature of the expanding universe, when it began, and how it will end. They might think the universe is static and eternal. Milkdromeda will be an island in the darkness, slowly getting darker and darker. Still, with its trillion stars, the local group is certainly a big enough playground to entertain humanity for a while. After all, we still haven't figured out how to leave our solar system, and we have dozens of billions of years at the very least to explore our galaxy. And we have the incredible luck to exist at the perfect moment in time to see not only our future, but also our most distant past just by looking into the night sky. As isolated as the local group is, it is our home. And it really is a spectacular place. Time for some behind-the-scenes content. You might have noticed that we sort of already made this video a few years ago, but the original had a regrettable mistake. In it, we said it would be physically impossible to ever leave the local group to reach other galaxy groups. But our travel limit is actually much larger, as we showed in this video.
Really?
It's not physically impossible to go further, but just extremely unlikely that it'll ever happen. So why did we leave the video up? Well, it has to do with the nature of the mistake. We talked to astrophysicists, and they thought it didn't matter.
Sounds scam.
The parts they considered important were correct, and they thought we should just leave it and move on. So with that feedback, we decided to spare the video. But since 2016, and really thanks to you verbs, we were able to grow Kurzgesagt and add fact checkers to the team and develop an in-depth process with experts and our detailed sources documents to avoid these sorts of mistakes and also to make our work transparent. We can't avoid making mistakes from time to time, but we can work hard on getting better. And this video kept bugging us. So we finally decided to replace it, not just re-upload, but remake it better and longer and add fun universe facts to make it worthwhile. Sorry for taking so long. We'll leave the old video up, but pin a comment and change the title. If you want to support us and our sometimes exhausting but hopefully worthwhile methods, you can watch, share and click the bell
Doesn't seem to
get
work
something
though.
from our shop. Inspired by this video's topic, we created a Milky Way poster and a local group poster, and we're working on a
Doesn't seem
series
to
about
work.
the entire universe. Visit our shop for more sciencey and kurzgesagte products designed with love and produced with care. In any case, thank you for watching.
A plane plummets out of the sky. A speedrunner inexplicably jumps to a higher platform. What the? And an election recount is triggered. All because of the same invisible phenomenon that permeates the universe. On May 18, 2003, voters in Belgium went to the polls. In many regions, voting was done on a computer,
I don't
something
think-
Belgians had been experimenting with for over a decade. But the system
I
had a
don't
backup.
think Eden
Each voter
QT
would
provide
insert
any
a
time
magnetic
capture.
card into the machine and make their selection on screen. Their vote was saved both to the computer and the magnetic card, which they dropped into a box for redundancy. Late that night, as the votes were being tabulated, one of the
Sus.
election officials detected a problem with the results from Schaerbeek, a municipality in central Brussels. Maria Vindevogel, a little-known candidate with her own party, received more votes than was mathematically possible. They knew this because of the way the preferential voting system works. So they took out the magnetic cards and started a recount. One by one, they fed each of them through the machines again.
I'll
For
try
several
again.
hours,
I think
the
I need to
recount
QT
was
twice.
complete. The vote totals for every candidate were exactly the same as before, except for Maria Vindevogel. In her case, the recounted number of votes was less than the original by 4,096. So what went wrong? How had her original tally been inflated by over 4,000 votes? Computer experts were brought in to run extensive tests on the software. They combed through the code but could find no bugs. They got the computer that had made the initial erroneous tally and tested the hardware again and again, but they could not replicate the error.
Oh shit.
Everything about the
So
hardware
far
seemed
away.
to be in perfect working order. And this left only one possible explanation, and it is seriously weird. The clue comes from the excess number of votes Vindevogel received, 4,096. Computers work using binary, strings of zeros and ones, each corresponding to a power of 2. So somewhere inside the computer tabulating all the votes was a string of bits representing the number of votes Maria received. It started the day all zeros, and then as each vote for her came in, it would increment by 1. Physically, this is done by turning on a transistor for 1 and turning it off for 0. What's remarkable about the number 4,096
Sus.
is that it is exactly a power of 2, 2 to the power of 12. That is the 13th bit. So for Maria Vindevogel to receive an extra 4,096 votes, only one thing needed to happen. The 13th bit had to flip from a 0 to a 1. But why would that happen? Computers work precisely because bits don't flip unless we want them to. Or do they? Looking into the problem, Belgian investigators found reports of similar issues from big computer companies starting in the 1970s. In 1978, Intel reported some strange errors popping up in their 16-kilobit dynamic random access memory, or DRAM. Ones would spontaneously flip to zeros with no apparent cause. The problem turned out to be the ceramic packaging the chip was encased in. With the demand for semiconductor packaging skyrocketing in the 1970s, a new manufacturing plant was constructed on the Green River in Colorado. Unfortunately, this site happened to be just downstream of an old uranium mill. Radioactive atoms made their way into the river and then into the ceramic packaging for Intel's microchips. Intel scientists investigating the problem found that even trace amounts of uranium and thorium in the ceramic were sufficient to cause problems. In their DRAM, memory was stored as the presence or absence of electrons in a semiconductor well. The alpha particles emitted by uranium and thorium were energetic and ionizing enough to create electron-hole pairs in silicon. If an alpha particle struck in just the right place, it could create a large number of free charge carriers, causing electrons to accumulate in the well, flipping a 1 to a 0. This is known as a single event upset, a type of soft error. The error is soft because the device hasn't been damaged. The bit has changed, but you could erase it and rewrite it with no problems. Investigators exposed the chips to alpha emitters
Mấy
with
cổng này ảo
different
lắm
levels
đó.
of activity.
Tại vì ưu tiên của
And
Eden
just
nó
as
còn
you'd
hồi
expect,
SP
they
cho tin
found
nữa
the
mà.
number of bit flips directly correlated with the number of alpha particles the chip had been exposed to. The reason this problem was identified in the 1970s was because chip components had been miniaturized to the point where a single alpha particle could produce enough charge to flip a bit. Immediately, these findings attracted a lot of attention. Before the paper was published, it was widely circulated in the industry. And as a result, chip manufacturers were a lot more careful to avoid radioactive materials when producing their microchips and packaging. Therefore, the bit flip that gave Maria Vindevogel 4,096 extra votes wasn't caused by natural radioactivity in the computer. So where did it come from? After Henri Becquerel discovered radioactivity with uranium in 1896, scientists sought a way to measure how radioactive were different materials. And one way to do this is with a gold leaf electrometer. When it's charged, the leaf is repelled, and you can measure the amount of charge by the angle of the leaf. Now, if ionizing radiation enters the chamber, it rips electrons off air molecules, creating positive and negative charges. Opposite charges are attracted to the leaf, discharging it over time. The higher the level of ionizing radiation, the faster the device discharges. In 1910, Theodore Wolff took his electrometer to the top of the Eiffel Tower. Since radioactivity was found in the soil and rocks of Earth, he expected that 300 meters up, the radiation would be just a few percent of the ground radiation. Instead, he found only a slight decrease. In 1911, Austrian physicist Victor Hess decided to take this experiment further. Literally, he loaded electroscopes into the basket of a hydrogen balloon. In his first 2 flights, he observed the same thing as Wolff. Up to an altitude of 1,100 meters, both trips revealed no fundamental change in radiation compared to the values observed on the ground. But the next year, he conducted 7 balloon flights, up to an altitude of 5,200 meters. And here, he discovered something remarkable. While there was an initial drop in radiation for the first several hundred meters, above 1 kilometer or so, the level increased with increasing altitude. At his maximum height, the level of radiation was several times greater than it was on the ground. The radiation appeared to be coming not from the Earth, but from the sky. Hess scheduled one of his balloon flights during a solar eclipse, and as the moon passed in front of the sun, he carefully watched his instruments. But the readings were unaffected. Even with the sun half covered, the level of radiation was the same. Since no influence of the eclipse on the penetrating radiation was noted, we conclude that even if a part of the radiation should be of cosmic origin, it hardly emanates from the sun. Victor Hess had discovered cosmic rays, high-energy radiation from space. But what were these rays exactly, and where were they coming from? Today, we know they aren't electromagnetic rays, as many suspected, but particles. Around 90% are protons, 9% are helium nuclei, and 1% are heavier nuclei. Some of them are from the sun, but they have comparatively low energy. High-energy cosmic rays, moving very close to the speed of light, come from exploding stars, supernovae, in our own galaxy and in others. And the highest energy particles are thought to come from black holes, including the supermassive black holes at the centers of galaxies. But it's hard to pin down exactly where cosmic rays come from because, as charged particles, they're deflected by magnetic fields in space. So they can wind their way through the universe for billions of years. A cosmic ray detected on October 15th, 1991 had an energy of 51 joules. That is a single subatomic particle with the energy of a baseball going 100 kilometers per hour. For obvious reasons, it was dubbed the OMG particle. But primary cosmic rays like these don't make it down to Earth's surface. Instead, they collide with air molecules around 25 kilometers above the ground and create new particles, like pions. These collide and decay into other particles like neutrons, protons, muons, electrons, positrons, and photons, which in turn collide with other air molecules in one long cascade. So from a single primary cosmic ray comes a shower of particles streaming towards the Earth. It is one of these particles that investigators suspect struck a transistor in a computer in Belgium, flipping the 13th bit from a 0 to a 1 and giving Maria Vindevogel 4,096 extra votes. But how often do things like this happen? In 1911, Charles Wilson made it possible to see the cosmic rays all around us when he perfected his cloud chamber, an enclosure with supersaturated water or alcohol vapor. When a cosmic ray passes through the chamber, it ionizes the gas, causing vapor to condense into tiny droplets on the ions, revealing the path of the particle. Alpha particles, helium nuclei, leave short thick tracks, while beta particles, electrons, leave long skinny trails. In 1932, Carl Anderson identified a trail that looked like it was made by an electron, but in the applied magnetic field, it curved in the wrong direction, implying it had a positive charge. Anderson had found the anti-electron, or positron. It was the first confirmed sighting of antimatter. 4 years later, also using a cloud chamber, he discovered the muon, again in cosmic rays. For his discovery of the positron, Anderson was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1936. He shared the prize with Victor Hess, the man who discovered cosmic rays in the first place, invisible particles that affect our lives in ways most of us are oblivious to. This is possibly the rarest thing to ever happen in a video game. In 2013, user Dota Teabag was speedrunning Super Mario 64 on the console. In the level Tick-Tock Clock, he suddenly upwarps onto a higher platform.
What the?
Did you get invisible walls?
What?
Please say you got invisible.
No, that was the craziest thing I've ever seen, though.
The move shaves off a few seconds, and it seems like a newly discovered glitch in the game that could give speedrunners an edge. User PanandCook12 put out a $1,000 bounty for anyone who could replicate the upwarp. But so far, after 6 years, no one has been able to. The best explanation anyone can come up with is that a cosmic ray caused the glitch. It's been shown that a single bit flip in the first byte of Mario's height coordinate could have caused the effect. On the main level, the byte was 11000101, but if you flip the last 1 to a 0, it changes his vertical position. And just by chance, this new height coincides with the higher floor. PanandCook12 wrote a script to manually flip the bit at the right moment, and was able to achieve the same upwarp. This is a particularly visible bit flip, but the truth is, cosmic rays are triggering bit flips all the time.
An upset there, or transient there, can alter the function of these devices, and we call that a single event functional interrupt. So an entire process can hang. So a blue screen of death that you get might actually have been a neutron or whatnot.
When people see the blue screen of death, could that be caused by a cosmic ray?
Absolutely.
These days, there are a number of ways computer chips are made resilient in the face of bit flips, like error correction code or ECC memory. But you can't totally prevent bit flips from happening. In 1996, IBM estimated that for each 256 megabytes of RAM, 1 bit flip occurs per month. The main culprit seems to be neutrons created in the shower of particles from cosmic rays. Starting in 2009, Toyota recalled millions of vehicles due to the problem of unintended acceleration.
We were in the fast lane driving at about 70, and he said that the car was continuing to accelerate and he couldn't bring it to a stop.
Many speculated that cosmic ray-induced bit flips in the electronic control system were the cause, so much so that NASA was called in to help with the investigation. But it turns out cosmic rays were probably not the culprit. NASA identified as the main causes sticky accelerator pedals, poorly fitted floor mats, and, most commonly, drivers pushing on the accelerator thinking it was the brake. But cosmic rays have caused crashes of supercomputers, especially at higher elevations. Los Alamos National Labs, located 2,200 meters above sea level, is constantly dealing with neutron-induced supercomputer crashes. So the software autosaves frequently, and neutron detectors have been installed throughout the facility. If you go even higher, like climbing up to cruising altitude in a plane, you can see the radiation from cosmic rays increasing on the Geiger counter.
To 0.5 microsieverts per hour at 18,000 feet, up to 1 microsievert per hour at 23,000 feet, over 2 microsieverts per hour at 33,000 feet, and over 3 microsieverts per hour at even higher altitudes and towards the poles.
At cruising altitude, this increases the chance of a single event upset by 10 to 30 times. This isn't critical if it happens in your laptop, but what if it occurs in the flight computer? On October 7th, 2008, an Airbus A330 took off from Singapore to Perth. Just over 3 hours into the flight, the plane suddenly pitched down, diving 200 meters in 20 seconds. Inside the plane, everyone experienced negative 0.8 Gs of acceleration. It would have felt like the plane had flipped over.
The G-force was enough, even with our 3-point harness, to lift us both out of the seat and push us forward as well.
Minutes later, the plane dropped another 120 meters. 119 people on board were injured, many from bumping their heads into the ceiling. So the pilots decided to make an emergency landing in Learmonth. In the investigation that followed, the fault seemed to occur with First Air Data Inertial Reference Unit, or ADIRU for short. This computer supplies critical data like airspeed, angle of attack, and altitude. The way it supplies each of these pieces of information is in a 32-bit binary word. The first 8 bits identify the type of information, and bits 11 to 29 encode the actual data. What seems to have happened is that a bit flip in the first 8 bits meant altitude information was mislabeled as angle of attack information. Inside the cockpit, alarms went on for overspeed and stall simultaneously, something that should be impossible. But the plane nosed down sharply to correct what it thought was a stall, throwing passengers and crew into the ceiling. Investigators looked into software bugs, software corruption, a hardware fail, physical environment factors, and electromagnetic interference. But each of these possibilities was found to be unlikely based on multiple sources of evidence. The other potential triggering event was a single event effect resulting from a high-energy atmospheric particle striking one of the integrated circuits within the CPU module. One of the challenges with single event upsets is that they are soft errors. They don't leave a trace. But interestingly, the Airbus A330 was built in 1992, when there were no specific regulatory or aircraft manufacturer requirements for airborne systems to be resilient to single event effects. With the space shuttle, redundancy was built in from the start. For navigation and control, there were 4 computers simultaneously running identical software. If one computer had a soft error, the other 3 would overrule it. Using this setup, they could also track the frequency of bit flips. On one 5-day mission, STS-48, there were 161 separate bit flips. Above the atmosphere, cosmic rays are so energetic, sometimes you can even see them.
Once in a while, you have your eyes closed and you're not asleep yet. And if you wait a little while, you occasionally will see a flash of light. And we think it is heavy particles or individual bursts of energy coming from radiation that are either going through the eyeball itself or going through the optic nerve. And the way that your body registers radiation going through it is amazingly enough by showing you a little flash in one of your eyes, just to remind you that you are subject to the radiation not only our sun, but every star in the universe. watching. I picture back to the
Damn,
first
so
astronauts
that-
who must have closed their eyes and seen that radiation and gone, I'm not going to tell them about this because no one's told me about it. I'm not. And I can just imagine the first two guys that said, hey, sometimes I see flashes of light. Do you see flashes of light? And then, oh, we all see flashes of light. Oh, okay. Well, that's all right then.
For missions to other planets, protecting electronics is critical.
If a single bit of information controls a critical function on your spacecraft, let's say your thrusters, and that goes from a 1 to a 0, from a on to off, or vice versa, you could lose the mission.
That's why the computer on the Perseverance rover that just landed on Mars is 20 years old. It's a PowerPC launched in 2001 with only 256 megabytes of RAM and 2 gigabytes of flash storage. But it is radiation hardened, meaning the design, materials, circuits, and software are built to withstand 40 times the radiation of an ordinary computer. It's been used on over a dozen space missions going back to 2005.
In fact, when we first started doing the PowerPC testing years ago, the way we did it, we just simply stuck an operating system processor in a beamline where we generate these particles on the planet and look for blue screen to death. You can kind of figure out what's going wrong and try to undo that so you don't get to the blue screen of death, because a spacecraft that gets into that mode is basically unrecoverable.
As the Voyager 1 spacecraft departed the solar system, one of the ways we could tell was by an increase in the flux of cosmic rays it experienced. Although on Earth the particles streaming from the sun and the solar wind are a source of radiation, further out, these same particles maintain a protective bubble, the heliosphere. It helps deflect and slow cosmic rays from interstellar space, protecting the solar system from ionizing radiation. But the sun has an 11-year activity cycle, so this protection fluctuates. The flux of cosmic rays on Earth is much lower when the sun is active than when it's dormant. In the history of our planet, cosmic rays may have played an even larger role, flipping bits not in electronics, but in the genetic codes of living organisms, providing some of the variation on which natural selection acts. Maria Vindevogel is now a member of the Belgian Chamber of Representatives, elected by people, not a part of it. But her story is a reminder of the zillions of particles winding their way through the universe for millions or billions of years.
Damn, OP.
One of which might, at any moment, change your life by passing through a tiny transistor and by passing one of which might, at any moment, change your life by passing through a tiny transistor and
crash.
Discovering the origin of cosmic rays, or where 4,096 extra votes came from, or how to protect the Mars rover from radiation requires problem solving, which is a perishable skill. And the best way to keep your problem-solving skills sharp is to solve a diverse range of problems, which you can do with the sponsor of this video, Brilliant. Brilliant is a website and app that teaches you STEM concepts in an interactive way. They have courses on topics from applied computer science to special relativity. Two courses I would recommend if you enjoyed this video are computer memory and algorithm fundamentals. Brilliant have really upped their interactivity recently, so instead of reading about algorithms, you're taught how to write algorithms yourself. Brilliant engages you in active learning. Instead of telling you the right answer, they allow you to figure it out for yourself. Plenty of helpful hints and guidance along the way. For viewers of this channel, Brilliant is offering 20% off an annual subscription to the first 200 people to sign up. Just go to brilliant.org/Veritasium. I'll put that link down in the description. So I want to thank Brilliant for supporting Veritasium, and I want to thank you for watching.
And complex number.
Xuống. Ra đến chỗ nào rồi? Let's try this.
100 trillion years from now, the last, the great civilization, hides in the darkness. Throughout their glory days, their engineers worked entire star systems. They dismantled planets and asteroids to construct an immense interstellar empire. But now, in the twilight of their time, all of this is long gone. All around them, the universe is dying as the last of the stars are going out. Over countless millennia, the sky has continued to fade into an eternal night. The aging universe gripped by desolation and decay. And so, in the darkness, they wait for the end. Long before they had realized it was coming, they knew that the universe was on a path of inevitable decline. Methodically, they hunted for a final place to wait out eternity, and embarked on their last great feat of engineering. Around a lost and lonely black hole, they built a new home. With demolished worlds as raw materials, they constructed a shell to completely enclose the darkness. And within this thin shell, barely withstanding the gravitational grip of their savior, they eked out their new lives. The dwindling light of dying stars rained down upon their final home, whilst their swirling black hole was harvested to power their existence. But more than that, the black hole at their heart gave them the greatest gift of all. For the black hole gave them time. No one remembered the name of the great scientist who had discovered the nature.
Oh, fuck that.
There are still lots of things about space that we may never be able to answer, like, is time travel possible? Or are aliens living somewhere else in the Milky Way? But there is one thing I believe about space. Space is trying to kill me. Space isn't out to get me personally. It's also trying to kill you and everybody else. Think about it. Space doesn't naturally have what we need to survive when we travel there. No air, it's too hot, or too cold. No ozone to protect us from those nasty UV rays either. This all sounds bad, but what can space really do to me if I stay on Earth? What we need to understand is that objects in space can cause people to think their days are numbered, even when there are events on Earth that can hurt or kill us before something from space does. So what are the odds that one of these objects will really affect Earth, and you, and me, in our lifetime? Well, we can take what we know about the universe to try and figure that out. You might have heard stories about asteroids hitting the Earth. That would be pretty bad. Scientists think asteroids might have killed off most of the dinosaurs. Sounds like something we should worry about, right? Well, astronomers can now watch asteroids in space and see them coming using complex computer models to predict the deadly rock's path. For a while, the reported odds that asteroid Apophis would strike Earth in 2036 were once 1 in 625. But after updating their data, astronomers now say the chances are extremely low. Okay, what about the sun? Hollywood movies like to pick on our sun by showing Earth destroyed by solar flares or the sun dying out, which would cause Earth to freeze. Astronomers predict our sun contains enough gas to make energy for another 3 to 5 billion years. So, in 3 to 5 billion years, if people still exist on Earth, they'll have to deal with that. But today, well, we're safe. Sometimes the sun does shoot flares at Earth, but the magnetic field surrounding our planet blocks most of that radiation. The radiation that does get through creates things like the aurora borealis. Gigantic solar flares can mess with our satellites and electrical equipment, but the chances of it killing you are pretty slim. Okay, what about that supermassive black hole in the middle of our galaxy? What happens to Earth and us when it pulls us in? After all, it is supermassive. Nope, not going to happen. That's one big object that can't bother us. How can we be so sure? Our solar system is on the edge of the Milky Way, while the nearest supermassive black hole is about 26,000 light years from Earth. that means we aren't on that black hole's menu. So you still think space objects are trying to kill you even after what I've told you so far? I think I've even convinced myself that odds are really good that space and the objects up there won't kill me after all. But I'll probably keep looking up just to make sure nothing is headed my way.
やっ
The 1918 Nobel Prize for Chemistry is probably the most important Nobel Prize ever awarded. It was given to German scientist Fritz Haber for solving one of the biggest problems humanity has ever faced. His invention is directly responsible for the lives of 4 billion people today. But when he received his prize, many of his peers refused to attend. 2 other Nobel Prize winners rejected their awards in protest. The New York Times wrote a scathing article about him. He is simultaneously one of the most impactful and tragic scientists of all time. Perhaps more than any other single person, he has shaped the world we live in today. Part of this video is sponsored by Ren. More about them at the end of the show. If you are an American citizen and you find an island with a lot of bird poop on it, well then you can claim that island for the United States, and the U.S. will have your back. The president is authorized to send in the Navy and the Army to defend your newly discovered poop-covered island. There are currently 10 American islands that were claimed in this way. And even though the law that made this possible was passed in 1856, it is still in effect to this day. So why did people want poop-covered islands so bad? There are a few dozen islands off the coast of Peru where millions of seabirds gather to mate. The waters near the island are full of fish. These millions of birds eat the fish, and then they poop. A lot.
And then they poop.
Since the region is hot and dry, this poop solidifies and accumulates over millennia. There are cliffs of bird poop 30 meters or 100 feet high. Technically, bird poop is called guano, and by the mid-1800s, buying and selling bird guano was big business. The price rose as high as $76 per pound, meaning you could trade 4 pounds of guano for 1 pound of gold. So why was there such a big market for bird poop? Well, to answer that, we have to look inside the human body. By weight, most of our bodies are made up of oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen. But the 4th most common element is nitrogen. Nitrogen is part of the amino acids that form proteins. It's part of hemoglobin, the compound that carries oxygen in red blood cells. And it's a central component of DNA and RNA. Nitrogen is essential for all life on Earth. We get our nitrogen by eating plants, or animals which have eaten plants. And plants get their nitrogen from the soil. The problem is, if you farm the same soil year after year, you will harvest the nitrogen out of it. And eventually, there isn't enough nitrogen for healthy plants to grow. They can't produce enough chlorophyll to photosynthesize, which stunts their growth. Their leaves turn yellow, and they are more susceptible to pests and disease. Crucially for farmers, nitrogen deficiency means smaller yields. The way to fix this is to add nitrogen back into the soil, which is where bird guano comes in. Guano is up to 20% nitrogen. Hundreds of years ago, Incan farmers realized that adding guano to their soil made crops grow tall. This is what allowed them to grow food in places that were previously unfarmable and to expand their empire. Such South America's rich deposits of bird poop did not go unnoticed by the rest of the world. In 1865, Spain went to war against its former colonies of Peru, Chile, Ecuador, and Bolivia for control of their guano-laden lands. But such was the world's appetite for nitrogen that by 1872, guano was running out, and Peru banned further exports. The world would need another way to get its nitrogen fixed. This was a crisis. William Crookes, a British chemist, made a dire prophecy in 1898. With the world's growing population and dwindling supplies of nitrogen, he said, "We stand in deadly peril of not having enough to eat. In less than 30 years' time," he argued, "people all over the world will be dying of starvation." But he also proposed a solution. It is the chemist who must come to the rescue. It is through the laboratory that starvation may ultimately be turned into plenty. Because here's the thing, nitrogen isn't rare, it's common. 78% of the air is nitrogen. But it's in a form that plants and animals can't use. 2 atoms of nitrogen triple bonded together. This bond is one of the strongest in nature. The way to measure the strength of a chemical bond is by the amount of energy that's required to break it. So, to break apart 2 chlorine atoms, for example, would take 2.5 electron volts. To break apart 2 carbons requires 3.8 eV. 2 oxygens, 5.2 eV. And to break apart 2 atoms of nitrogen requires 9.8 electron volts, a tremendous amount of energy. There are 2 processes that do this naturally. Lightning releases so much energy it breaks apart N2 into individual nitrogen atoms. They then quickly react to form nitrogen oxides. These molecules stay in the atmosphere until they react with water droplets in clouds and fall to the ground in rain. There are also a few types of bacteria living in soil that can break the N2 bond, using a tremendous amount of energy to do so. They make nitrogen available to plants. But bacteria only replenish the nitrogen slowly, and there's not enough lightning to produce nitrogen compounds at scale. So chemists tried. In 1811, Georg Hildebrandt mixed nitrogen and hydrogen in a sealed flask, trying to make ammonia, one of the nitrogen-containing molecules found in guano. When that didn't work, he submerged the flask 300 meters underwater to increase the pressure. And that didn't work either, but he was on the right track. Increasingly sophisticated versions of these experiments were carried out over the following 100 years. All of them failed. So when Fritz Haber became interested in this problem in 1904, he was joining a long line of failed chemists. He was 36 years old, working as a low-level academic at the University of Karlsruhe. He was also a new father, with a 2-year-old boy named Hermann and a wife, Clara, who was one of the first women to get a PhD in chemistry. Driven by pride and competition with another scientist, Haber spent 5 years on the problem. His idea was to combine nitrogen and hydrogen not only at high pressure, but also at high temperature, and in the presence of a catalyst, something that lowers the amount of energy required to split diatomic nitrogen. To do this, new experimental apparatus had to be invented. Haber worked tirelessly on this project, building equipment that could tolerate ever higher temperatures and pressures. He also got lucky. At the time, he was moonlighting as a technical consultant for a light bulb manufacturer. So there he had access to lots of really hard-to-find materials, like the element osmium. Osmium is rare. In his day, there was only about 100 kilograms of the refined metal in existence. But the company he worked for was experimenting with using it for filaments in their light bulbs, so they had most of the world's supply. Haber suspected it might make the perfect pattern, so he brought a sample back to his lab. There, in the third week of March 1909, Haber placed his sheet of osmium in the pressure chamber. Then he pressurized and heated the nitrogen and hydrogen to 200 atmospheres and 500 degrees Celsius. Under these conditions, the triple bonds broke apart, and nitrogen reacted with hydrogen. Of the total gas mixture, 6% turned into ammonia. When the gas was cooled, 1 milliliter of ammonia dripped out the end of a narrow tube into a beaker. An elated Haber rushed from one lab to another, yelling, "Come on down, there's ammonia." Germany's biggest chemical company, BASF, commercialized Haber's process. Within 4 years, they had opened a factory in Oppau, producing 5 tons of ammonia per day. People spoke of making bread from the air. With the fertilizer from this industrial process, on the same plot of land, farmers were able to grow 4 times as much food. And as a result, the population of the Earth quadrupled. There's a good chance you owe your life to Haber's invention. The Earth supports 4 billion more people today than it could without nitrogen fertilizer. In fact, around 50% of the nitrogen atoms in your body came from the Haber process. The invention made Fritz Haber a wealthy man. He got a promotion, becoming the founding director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physical Chemistry in Berlin. He also befriended some of the best scientists of his day, including Max Planck, Max Born, and Albert Einstein. After Einstein separated from his first wife in 1914, he stayed the night at Haber's house. But if Haber was so well regarded, why was he shunned by colleagues when he won the Nobel Prize? Well, it all comes down to what happened in World War I. When the war broke out, Haber volunteered for military duty.
Yeah, missed
Unlike
it too.
pacifist Einstein, who denounced the war, Haber was a patriot. He wanted to use his expertise to help his country. Only a few months into the war, the German army was already running out of gunpowder and explosives. Ammonium nitrate, besides being an excellent fertilizer, is also an explosive. Just look at what happened in Beirut in August of 2020.
I still wonder how can
a warehouse containing almost 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate caught fire. And in the extreme heat, the fertilizer detonated. The blast, which could be heard hundreds of kilometers away.
Alright, time to eat. Eat time. See in 2 hours. Almost 2 hours. Eat.